Excellent. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome to the BPP Advisory Committee meeting for August 18th, 2022. Welcome. My name is Joseph Holt. I'll kick off quick introductions. If the other board members or advisory committee members would go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
This is Margaret Ryder. I'm consumer representative appointed by the Senate Rules Committee.
Kenson Chu, board member.
Melanie Delgado, I'm a consumer representative.
Tess Dubois Carey, with education.
Lee Farron, a consumer representative.
Very good. And that I think wraps up our 6 voting members. We're going to go ahead and confirm that we have a quorum established with 6 voting members. So we have established a quorum and can jump into our agenda. The first agenda item is our public comments on any items that are not on the agenda. So this public participants, this is your opportunity to provide comment on anything that is not going to be discussed in our agenda today. For each of the agenda items, you will have opportunity to make public comment. We'll have train stops at each of those items. And so if you have something for later in the meeting, you can go ahead and hold that comment. But if you have a comment that is not on the agenda, now would be the time and the only appropriate time to do that. So David, I'll turn it over to you to administer that.
We are now open for public comment not on the agenda. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. And we will call on people in the order we have requests. And it looks like our first request comes from Jolie. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Can you hear me? Test, test.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, good morning, thanks. I'd like to ask a question pertaining to the current backlog that the QEU is experiencing. On the applications page of the Bureau website, it indicates that initial approval applications are being reviewed, which were received in July of 2021. However, many applications then go on to the Quality of Education Unit, which is experiencing quite the backlog right now. Some applications are taking upwards of 2 years to be fully reviewed. And my question would be, what steps are being considered by the Bureau to support the QEU to overcome that backlog? And might the Bureau consider updating the dates provided on the website to give prospective schools a more accurate idea of an application processing timeline?
Very good. Thank you for your question. A quick note that this is a forum to receive public input on agenda items, or even, as in this case, items not on the agenda. We won't be able to respond to individual questions today in the course of the meeting. Please do, though, provide your contact information to the moderator, and board staff and Debbie's team could reach out to you and assist you with your question. We also could consider that for a future agenda item, which is a discussion point later.
That was my thinking. I just thought posing as a question would be helpful. I would like to follow up that question with another question, acknowledging that it won't be discussed here today, but I would like to bring it up. Because of that approximate timeline on the website, some schools choose not to identify a location for their school and submit initially without one, knowing that it takes about a year before licensing can review that application. But then the licensing analysts require an application in order to move forward. And then because of that same backlog, schools are, prospective school owners are left paying rent on a location which they're not legally allowed to operate in for some time. So it's a pinch point and a pain point. So again, there's no specific question. Well, there is, what can we do to help alleviate that, that pinch point? But if I could provide my contact information, or if it could be placed on a future agenda item, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
And that appears to be our only request for comment at the moment. Do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you. Our next agenda item is review and approval of the minutes from our last meeting on May 17th. Knowing that all committee members had a chance to review that in advance of the meeting, we'll go straight to discussion from board members or advisory committee members rather, as to whether there are any corrections or notes on the minutes as published. Okay. Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes as written.
So moved. This is Margaret.
This is Lee, I'll second.
Thank you, Lee. A second. So we have a motion and a second. Prior to going to the vote, do we need to open that to public comment before we take a vote on the motion?
This is the moderator. I believe the answer is yes, but I will defer to someone who has authority to say so.
I also believe the same, but we'll invite our legal counsel to weigh in on that.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do we need to open to public comment for a motion prior to voting on a motion to approve the minutes?
Yes, you do.
Great, thanks. So David, let's go ahead and do that now.
We are now open for public comment on the motion. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the motion?
Yes, please. So the motion is to approve the minutes. Go ahead, Richie, if you take a roll call vote.
Joseph Holt,
Yes.
Margaret Ryder,
Yes.
Kansen Chu,
Yes.
Melanie Devato,
Yes.
Tess DuBois-Carey,
Yes.
and Leah Farron.
Yes.
That's all the members.
Very good. The motion passes. Appreciate that. David, you have a very soothing speaking voice. You should work on like an easy listening radio station.
Thank you for the compliment.
Our next agenda item would be to entertain remarks. Hear from a representative from the Department of Consumer Affairs.
Wonderful. We have Brian Clifford here with us today to share updates from DCA.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity today to provide the DCA update. Well, the first thing I'd like to address is public meetings. The governor signed Senate Bill 189 on June 30th, 2022, which reinstitutes through July 1st, 2023, the remote meeting provisions of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act that were in place during the pandemic. The changes took effect immediately upon signing. Please be aware that DCA wants you to have the right meeting for the business of the Border Bureau while still taking into consideration both costs and public participation. We're asking boards and bureaus to track the costs for these meetings, even those where there isn't travel, and also use WebEx as much as possible to allow the public to attend remotely, especially as COVID-19 numbers continue to rise. DCA is still asking boards to complete the public meetings survey to assist in tracking these costs for your board meetings in order to be able to compare costs for in-person and WebEx meetings, since this legislative change is only in place for this fiscal year. We have distributed the surveys to all boards and bureaus and ask that they be completed within 30 days of each meeting held. Should you have any questions, please reach out to DCA Member Relations. Though legislation is passed allowing remote meetings, We are reminding boards and bureaus that choose to hold in-person meetings of the safety measures, best practices, and recommendations for holding public meetings. In planning for upcoming meetings, please remember that all board and bureau members and staff are expected to follow the state and local public health guidelines that apply in the area where meetings are held. Face coverings are strongly recommended for all board and bureau members and staff at meetings. The California Department of Public Health strongly recommends that individuals continue to mask in indoor settings. Please post face covering guidance signage at your meeting check-in or entrance. Regarding vaccination and testing, prior to meeting in person or at a remote location, members need to submit vaccine verification to DCA's Office of Human Resources or be subject to COVID-19 testing. Moving on to the DCA Enlightened License Project, we are pleased to announce that the inaugural report of the Enlightened Licensing Project is now available and was distributed to all boards and bureaus on May 13th. This innovative and collaborative project was started to streamline and enhance licensing processes by utilizing the knowledge and expertise of subject matter experts within DCA boards and bureaus. This project was conducted in partnership with the Board of Registered Nursing. After a thorough assessment of some of BRN's licensing processes, the board co-chairs provided recommendations to introduce new ideas and implement best practices for critical licensing activities. DCA held a brown bag event on June 1st to review the recommendations with all boards and bureaus, as we hope that other boards and bureaus can learn from this report and implement recommendations where applicable. We believe it is so important to learn from each other and share our knowledge. We will be turning to enforcement next, and we'll be reviewing the enforcement processes at a board through this enlightenment process, utilizing enforcement subject matter experts. DCA also held 2 additional brown bag meetings with executive officers and bureau chiefs. On June 5th, the department rolled out changes to its regulation development and approval process. These changes were also discussed and approved by DCA's executive officer and bureau chief cabinet. DCA shared documents on the process and changes with all of the boards and bureaus. On August 10th, DCA held a brown bag meeting on the topic of social media. The presentation included an overview of social media best practices, content examples, security, and more. A copy of the presentation was provided to participants. If you have any questions or requests related to social media, please contact DCA's Deputy Director of Communications, Monica Vargas. And I want to announce a couple of new hires at the department. DCA is pleased to announce that Nicole Lay was hired on June 24th as the Deputy Director of DCA's Office of Administrative Services. With more than 20 years of state service, Nicole has dedicated 10 of those years to DCA, most recently serving as the Acting Deputy Director of Administrative Services, where she was responsible for overseeing the business functions of human resources, fiscal operations, and business services. Prior to this role, Nicole was Chief of DCA's Office of Human Resources. She also previously served at the Contractor State License Board and the Department of Motor Vehicles. We are very excited to have her as part of DCA's executive leadership team. Additionally, Olivia Trejo was appointed as DCA's Chief of Office of Human Resources as of August 1st. Olivia has over 22 years of human resources experience in state government, and the last 9 years have been with DCA's Office of Human Resources. She began her career in 2000 at the Department of Insurance, then the Department of Real Estate, and most recently as DCA's Assistant Human Resources Chief for nearly 5 years. Lastly, Taylor Schick was appointed DCA's Chief Fiscal Officer in July. Taylor has more than 16 years of state experience, all with DCA. Taylor began his career in 2006 as a budget analyst and most recently served as DCA's budget officer. As the new Chief Fiscal Officer, Taylor will lead the dedicated accounting and budget teams. And that is my update, and I would like to turn it back over to the chair.
Very good. Thank you, Brian. Committee members, do you have any questions or comments for the DCA representative?
This is Margaret. I have a question. You referenced the regulation approval process efforts. Can you indicate whether or not you anticipate that will increase the speed at which that process is completed? Because for years, we have seen that regulation approval process is very lengthy. And I'm wondering what these changes will mean as far as improving the rapidity with which that process gets completed.
Thank you for that question. Yes, that is 100% the hope and expectation of these changes is that we will streamline and accelerate our review and approval process.
Can you just give a brief explanation of what the changes are that you anticipate would in fact result in a speeded up process?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not an expert on the changes to the reg process, but I can share that I know that increased collaboration between the regulation attorneys and board and staff is a big part of it. One of the new steps would be an initial kickoff meeting between all of the groups involved to make sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of the intent of the regulations, the goals, and the timelines. And I think there's also some timelines included in terms of turnaround times in terms of legal reviews.
Is there going to be any increased staffing in the people who handle the regulatory process? Would that make it move more quickly, or is that not anticipated?
I don't and believe that there is an expected increase in the staffing for the reg attorneys. No.
Thank you.
Committee members, any other questions or comment? Very good. We'll move on to public comment. David, would you administer that?
Absolutely. We are now accepting public comment on agenda item 4. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. And thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate it. All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is the formal adoption of our advisory committee handbook. Debbie, did you want to present on this?
Sure. I know this is a topic we've discussed at the last few meetings regarding the handbook. The handbook has been in existence for quite some time, as members you know, but SB 802, which was chaptered last year, turned the handbook effectively over to the committee by asking the committee to adopt reasonable rules for the conduct of its affairs. So this is why it's up for your consideration and vote today. The changes that have been made to the handbook were focused primarily on instituting term limits. We discussed those last year, and those were also driven by SB 802. We've done a little bit of refreshing of the handbook in terms of just updating the mission and values as needed. We've discussed those at prior meetings as well. The one change discussed at the last meeting that members requested was to build in some sort of routine review of the handbook over time. You can see the language that we added in on page 23 of the handbook that's in the packet. As we discussed, we added in the language that it is subject to review and adoption by the advisory committee during years in which the Bureau undergoes strategic planning or more frequently as desired. So that's really the change that we discussed last time. We added it in and it's put forth for your consideration.
Very good, thank you. And I know all committee members have had an opportunity to review in advance, so we'll open to committee comments or discussion before we consider a motion to approve the handbook. I can kick that off and express again appreciation and a reminder to the committee on the language surrounding the expression of general will. I just as a reminder, it hasn't been the practice of the committee for a number of years to really do that on any occasion. And so we generally have a collection of opinions which are expressed and observed certainly by the Bureau leadership and staff, which is good and appropriate. We may find occasion to, if a topic is important enough, or if we want to formalize, particularly in an area where we believe we have consensus, and would like to provide more formal direction or encouragement to the Bureau, we can do that through motions to express the general will of the committee. We don't have to do that always, again, but that is an option available to us that we haven't used in the past. So committee members, any other questions or comments about the handbook?
This is Margaret. Right, and actually we did vote one time in the past, as I recall. We've had at least one motion back several years ago, which was an issue that was important. So, but yes, I think it is very helpful to just have a good discussion as we've had over these years. And then on occasion, there may be times when it makes sense to have a motion. There is one thing I just wanted to point out, and I'm sorry I didn't notice this before, but I don't think it's more of a technical issue. On page 24, in the first paragraph about the Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education, there's a sentence, I think it's about the second to last sentence, talking about the Student Tuition Recovery Fund, which is used to reimburse students harmed by school closure. Technically, that's true, but it's not complete because it's used to reimburse students for other reasons. I frankly don't think it's significant enough to postpone a vote on this or an approval of this, but I just wanted to mention that. So in the future, that might be something that when there is an update, that might be added in.
I know staff is making a note of that. Any other committee member discussion or questions? Very good. So I would entertain a motion to approve the update to the handbook. And thank you, Debbie, for including the language about the review and tying it to the strategic cycle. It makes perfect sense. It's really well done.
I'll make a motion. Tess Dubois Carey.
I'll second that. This is Melanie Delgado.
Excellent. Thank you both. We have a motion and a second to approve the advisory committee handbook, which again was available in the public-facing committee meeting materials. And so we'll open at this point, prior to taking a vote, to public comment on this agenda item and the approval of the handbook. David, would you administer that?
We are now open for public comment on this matter. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. So we'll go ahead and take a vote on the motion to approve the advisory committee handbook. Richie, would you administer that?
Yes, Joseph Holt,
Yes.
Margaret Ryder,
Yes.
Kansen Chu, Kansen Chu, you have to unmute yourself. Give him a moment. Go to the next member, Melanie Delgado,
Yes.
Tess Dubois Carey,
Yes.
Leah Farron,
Yes.
Kansen Chu,
This is the moderator. We've sent a request to Kansen Chu to unmute.
I don't see his video any longer. Is he still on?
Kansen didn't have video. Oh yeah, he did have video earlier, yeah.
He's not showing, or he is showing in the panelist list.
So I believe we have a majority, I know we have a majority vote in the absence of canceled vote, and we have his presence in the meeting to establish a quorum. Margaret, do you have any objection to considering the motion passed based on those facts?
No, of course not.
Excellent. So the motion is approved, and Canson will continue to monitor your ability to participate in the meeting, but assume that you are still participating. Very good. So we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is
hi. This is Lynn. Can I jump in here for a second?
Hey.
I
Sorry,
can't
this
tell.
is Kenson. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
I have
okay.
some technical difficulty. Yes, my cast of yes vote.
Okay, never mind.
Lynn was about to, Margaret, reprimand us for our creative use of quorum and voting, maybe.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. When I looked at the videos, I scrolled across, I couldn't find Canson, and then the next time I did it, he was there. So sorry about that.
No, it was my fault. I just had some technical difficulty. Cannot get to the WebEx app.
No problem. Thank you very much, Canson. All right, we will move then, as noted, to the next agenda item 6, which is a status update on a variety of regulatory matters.
And for this, we have our regulation specialist, David Dumble, to present on these updates.
Hello, I'm David Dumble. I'm the Regulations and Legislation Manager for the Bureau. And first item is one that I'm sure you're aware of, but nevertheless, it gives me great pleasure to announce that the AB 1340 regulation for annual reports and labor market outcome data was approved by the Office of Administrative Law on July 11th, which means that it will be effective for the annual report submissions for this year. So we will be receiving the identification data in the annual report and then proceeding on to match that with EDD data after we process it. So I'm very happy this has been concluded, and we look forward to proceeding on with this important work. Are there any questions?
Yeah, that could be a question, David, for you, or maybe Debbie for you, or what training or workshops are planned to engage college stakeholders on the additional reporting requirements to facilitate and mitigate any errors in that data collection process?
I'm going to suggest that, when this topic is going to come up again later in the program updates related to annual reports.
Okay.
And we're going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing on the programmatic side there. So I'm going to actually just ask if we can put a pin in that part of the question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's totally appropriate. Thanks. Go ahead.
Moving on to the next item, educational programs less than 32 hours. In response to suggestions from the advisory committee, we have amended our text. We have now added a disclosure requirement. We are requiring a stipulated disclosure in school catalogs that if the school has both exempted and non-exempted programs, that it clearly identify the exempted programs and give a rundown of what the consequences of that are, namely no bureau oversight, no participation in STRIF. We've amended the text of the proposal and have submitted that back to DCA for legal review. Are there any questions?
I have a comment, I guess, on the disclosure in the catalog. I appreciate that you're putting that in. I think that is very important. I guess as I see things, you probably don't have authority to put it or require it to be on the website or things like that, which would be even more helpful. But one thing I'm wondering about in the text, it says that this notice should be basically conspicuous, prominent, and so forth, such as the format shown here. The format shown there is not particularly prominent or conspicuous. Important information isn't bolded, it's not in larger type. I just think that maybe a little more work needs to be done on what your sample is, so that it is a little more readable. It could be done also in shorter lines. I just maybe have somebody work on it who's used to doing, trying to get disclosures out to people so that your sample is really a really good model. Whereas right now it just seems to be sort of in normal text, not particularly highlighted in any way. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll certainly consider that, and it's still not carved in stone at this point, so we'll do what we can. Next item is the substantive changes proposal. Just to recap, last year SB 802 adopted 4 new substantive change items that had to be reported to the Bureau before being adopted. One of them, a change in distance education learning management systems, we're dealing with in a separate proposal that we haven't made yet. The other 3, a change in 25% or more in the number of hours to complete an educational program, change from clock hours to credit hours, and beginning participation in federal Title IV financial aid is in the substantive change package. We've submitted the text to DCA, and while they are reviewing the text, we have completed work on creating new forms for the Title IV participation and for the change from clock hours to credit hours. And the other one, changing 25% or more in the number of hours to complete a program. We are incorporating that in the existing change in educational objectives form. A change of that substantial nature would be a change in educational objectives. And so by putting it in that form, we are eliminating the requirement that schools would have to submit 2 separate forms, one for the change in educational objectives and one for the change in the number of hours to complete a program. So we've completed work on those forms. And once we get feedback from DCA Legal about the text, we'll submit the entire package to DCA. Are there any questions? Hearing none. The last item is denial of out-of-state applications. Initially, this was 2 separate proposals. One was dealt with the application that out-of-state schools had to fill out to apply, and the other was changes to our appeal process now that we have the authority to actually use our discretion in denying applications. And we have now merged these 2 separate proposals into one single proposal, which we think will be easier for DCA to analyze and for us to do a fiscal analysis on. So those are now one proposal before DCA, and we're looking forward to moving forward with that as we go forward. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, that concludes my report.
Very good. Thank you, David. Committee members, one more opportunity. Any questions or comments about any of this?
May I just add in one comment very quickly?
Yeah.
I just wanted to also point out that we did make, on page 41 of the packet, there is the kind of updated kind of a tracker. And we did make some updates to the presentation of that. All of the content should reflect what Dave just shared, but just flagging that we did make some changes to the formatting of it, in hopes of making it a bit clearer about where packages are and how they flow through, either kind of for text versus the entire regulatory package. So just wanted to put that out in case anyone had any questions on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that update, and I like the note as well on the anticipated opportunity for our committee to review on the LMS changes in November. Appreciate that.
And can I just, since the question was asked before about the new DCA regulatory process, we will be using the new process on the 4th substantive change item that we're working on separately. We're having a pre-kickoff meeting next week to prepare for the kickoff meeting. So we're looking forward to using the new process, and we do have hopes that it will expedite the process from what it has been.
Very good, thank you. Committee, any other comments or questions?
I appreciate the format that you have here for showing where things are in the process. That's very helpful. One thing I would ask is, in this process, maybe I should know, but I don't necessarily know, in between some of these is where you bring it to the advisory committee, which you may do once or more than once. Could you in the future just have a little carrot or something saying anticipated to come to the advisory committee or something like that at this point, or just so we have a better understanding of where our review is in the process?
Certainly, we can do that.
Thanks.
Very good. We'll go ahead and move to opening public comment on agenda item 6 and the updates on the regulatory matters.
We are now open for public comment on agenda item 6. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And it looks like we have a comment from Amber McLean. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
On the programs with less than 32 hours, what was the status of that?
Again, thank you for your question. We're not able to address questions directly that come in from public comment. This meeting is recorded, and so you can refer back to this, and you can also provide your contact information to the moderator, and Bureau staff could reach out to you following the meeting as well.
Seeing no other requests for comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. All right, we will move on to our next agenda item, number 7, which is legislative update regarding SB 1433.
And for that, I will invite Greg Pruden with Department of Consumer Affairs Legislative Affairs Unit to present.
Good morning, folks. Can everybody hear me fine?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, good morning, Chair, members, and Chief Cochran. My name is Gregory Pruden, and I'm a legislative manager with the Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you for having me here today. I'm here to present SB 1433, the Bureau Sunset Bill this year. When I last spoke to you in May, the bill did not contain much in the way of policy changes, and a formal sunset hearing had not been held. The legislature ultimately did not conduct a formal sunset hearing for BPPE this year, having conducted a hearing last year when it extended the Bureau for 1 year until January 1st of 2023 via SB 802. SB 1433, this year's sunset bill, was substantially amended on June 22nd and contains several important policy changes. The bill extends the Bureau's operations for 4 years until January 1st, 2027. Other changes include authorizing the Bureau to establish in regulation conduct that constitutes limited physical presence, automatically terminating an institution's approval to operate on the date of closure and preventing a terminated license from being reinstated, expanding prohibited business practices, authorizes the Bureau to deny applications from institutions owned or managed by individuals who violated the California Private Postsecondary Education Act at prior institutions. The bill clarifies the definition of to operate to include the enrollment of Californians by institutions based outside of the state. It addresses situations where accrediting agencies lose federal recognition. It also addresses situations where institutions lose accreditation by a recognized agency. The bill subjects changes in institution manager or person in control to the substantive change requirements requiring Bureau prior authorization. The bill automatically suspends Bureau approval of programs that lose their approval from required state licensing agencies. And the bill allows out-of-state public institutions that maintain a physical presence in California to apply for Bureau approval to operate and subjects them to the Act. I'd also mentioned during the May presentation that the governor's May revised budget proposed $24 million in general fund support for the Bureau over 3 years. I'm happy to report that as approved in the Budget Act of 2022, BPPE is scheduled to receive $24 million in general fund support over the next 3 years. This additional general fund money will assist BPPE to pay back its special fund loan from the Bureau of Automotive Repair, and it will also provide temporary relief to the special fund. Additionally, BPPE also received permanent expenditure authority to continue the operation of OSAR. Thank you for allowing me to present SB 1433 today. With that, I turn it back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Gregory. Committee members, do you have any questions or comments regarding SB 1433?
I would just say that I think that has a lot of very important improvements, which I'm delighted to see. There always could be some tweaks here and there and improvements, but this is should be a big help for the things it is including. So I appreciate very much, and I wondered if you could comment. I think it's sort of at its last two hurdles, what the prospects are for passage and signature.
Well, you know, a long time ago, Margaret, I got out of the business of predicting, you know, the future when it comes to actions on bills. But you're absolutely right. The bill is very close to its final passage. As of this morning, it's on third reading. Because it had amendments in the assembly, it will need to go back for concurrence. So it still has 2 more votes before it would go to the governor's desk for his signature. But I'm certainly hopeful that both of those hurdles will be cleared and that the bill will make its way to the governor's office and that we will receive a signature and 4 years of sunset extension for the Bureau.
Committee members, any other question or comment? Okay, we will move to.
Sorry, one more thing.
Yeah.
I don't know the sense of the committee, but I am wondering if there is sufficient support in the committee that we might want to do a motion to show the advisory committee's support for the bill, and whether that is something that we can do, or whether it really matters, whether it have any significance.
I have an opinion on that. I think the Bureau actually itself doesn't express, doesn't lobby or support or contend with the bill or participate in the legislative process in that way. And in the sense that we as an advisory committee, our purpose, that is to inform and shape Bureau practice, policy and practice, it would seem inappropriate to me to have the committee endorse or contest pending legislation.
That's fine. Thank you.
Any other committee conversation on that topic or broadly for the update from Gregory? Very good. Hearing none, we'll open to public comment on the legislative update for SB 1433.
We are now open for public comment on agenda item 7. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you. We'll move then to agenda item number 8. And Debbie, I'm hopeful that your staffing scheduling conflicts have resolved. We're going to get it.
We're definitely going through these items faster.
Yeah.
So we definitely have staffing to keep going, but we are going to take some of these items out of order. So we're actually going to go ahead and start with, we'll come back to A and B. We're going to pick up with the quality of education report. And I will, for that, we have Joanna Murray, who is our senior education specialist. I will just introduce her by way of also giving a bit of a staffing update about our quality education unit. It is a very small but mighty team here at the Bureau. It's also, I think, safe to say it's among the most specialized positions that we have at the Bureau, which means they can be challenging to hire. So last time Joanna Murray presented to you all as the acting education administrator, which is the head of the quality of education unit. Those types of positions are temporary in nature. So she is now back to being a senior education specialist. Ebony Santee, our licensing chief, has taken up that role, but we are working as fast as we possibly can to fill that position in a permanent capacity for both the education administrator as well as the education specialist vacancies that are in that unit. But so with just that note and of explanation about the change in title for Joanna, and as a way of thanking her for all of her service as the acting head of that unit and continuing on as the senior ed specialist, I will turn it over to Joanna.
Hi, good morning. Everyone can hear me, I assume. So we don't have much to report in terms of changes on the documents you have there for reference. Always a little slow moving with the pursuit of accreditation, of course. I did want to add, though, that something that we've done just the end of last year, we developed about a 15-minute long PowerPoint video that does go ahead and explain to schools that are seeking to add degree programs what that monitoring process looks like. So in terms of what does the law say, what do regulations say, what do they do, and what can they expect from the Bureau in terms of us reaching out and ensuring that we're keeping them accountable along their journey and also making ourselves available. And it's been very helpful to be able to provide this to schools. We don't wait until they're already provisionally approved. We're actually providing this to them now up front as they're submitting an application to be allowed to add these degree programs. And then we're also recommending that they schedule a call with their assigned education specialist to talk through their proposed accreditation plan. So rather than just submit it to us, have us review it, accept it as satisfactory, actually having a conversation about it and making a point of talking with institution representatives who will, hopefully, we encourage somebody who will continue to be involved in that process over the years, as opposed to someone who's maybe just temporarily assisting with that piece of the application. So it's been good. And we're hoping that that's going to be something that just continues to help schools be successful in their pursuit of accreditation, because we very much want that as much as they do. Any questions about anything we provided today?
Committee members, do you have any questions or comments for Joanna? Very good. A question, Debbie, I'm assuming we want to take public comment on the entirety of 8 rather than each of the separate topic items.
I think that we've done it previously, maybe after each of them, and especially given that today that we're jumping around, it might make sense to do each one in particular.
Very good. We'll do. So we'll open for public comment. We're currently on agenda item 8, letter C, the quality of education report. That corresponds in the public materials to pages 77 and 78. So we're open public comment.
We are now open for public comment on agenda item 8C. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And Debbie, I'll just let you lead us through the letters here as you keeping tabs on who you have available.
Thank you. It's very exciting monitoring the list in real time. I am going to go, I think I'm going to be extra cautious, and I think we're going to then, for the moment, skip over D and E for right now and move into F for complaints and investigation report. And that is Daniel Rangel, our enforcement chief of those units. Make sure we've got Daniel. I see he's coming on, but maybe having some tech issues.
There we go. I was on mute. I apologize. Good morning, advisory committee members. So I'll be presenting the complaint and investigations statistics this morning. If we can move to the next slide, please. So we begin with our complaints received. I know that this is something that I had mentioned in previous meetings, that we are seeing a trend of higher cases that are coming in, or higher volume of cases that are coming in. Looking back at previous years pre-pandemic, this is pretty consistent with those numbers. So we are confident that this is like our new baseline for what we are going to continue to see, rather than the lower amounts that we had in 2020 and 2021. And a good indication of that, again, looking back to 2020, in March of 2020, we had high numbers. And then when the pandemic hit and a lot of the shutdown happened, there was a drastic drop in the amount of complaints, and it kind of stayed at that level for the remainder of 2021 or 2020 and then into 2021. So looking at 2022, it's more of an indication of what we are going to continue to see moving forward. If we can move to the next slide, please. So this, again, is just a comparison from year to year. If you're looking at the numbers for 2022, we are at the halfway point currently. And so we are projected to well exceed the prior 2 years numbers that we had as far as complaints coming in. So also with that, we have showing below that is the complaints that we received, which is 587 total. Of those 587 complaints, they are accounted for by 398 schools. So I know that the advisory committee had asked that we show numbers of complaints for like the 5 highest schools. We weren't able to get that into the slides, but I do have that information for you, and I wanted to be able to provide that for you, and it will be something that will be added in future future slides for the meetings. So we'll begin with School A. The number of complaints received for School A are 12. Number of complaints for School B is 9. School C is 8. School D is 8. And School E is 8. And then just a little bit of reference for those numbers. Some of those numbers, the higher numbers, are driven by some unapproved schools that we have received multiple complaints for, that we are currently investigating. So that's where many of those numbers do come from. And then again, the numbers for the contracted schools and complaints received were the 45 complaints were against 17 of the contracted schools. Next slide, please. So this is our complaints closed. So we have been seeing some ebbs and flows as far as the closures from month to month, which is normal with investigations, as there's not, it's hard to predict when investigation will be completed and depending on the complexity. But I will also acknowledge that the production or the output as far as the amounts being closed compared to prior years has dropped. And I know that could be attributed to a lot of turnover. I know that there was turnover from the chief position, and it was vacant for quite some time. Shortly after our last advisory committee meeting, we had two managers that actually departed from the Bureau for promotion. So we were happy that they were able to have new opportunities to promote with another state agency. But unfortunately for us, it left some vacancies for our unit to kind of keep the investigations moving forward. So that we are working through those. I am happy to announce that we did hire one of the manager positions has been filled, and it was actually an internal candidate that was promoted. So we are happy to do that, and I think that that's going to assist us in this transition as we move forward. We are still currently in the process of working to fill other vacancies in our unit. So I know that that's something that we are working on. We are also working on efficiencies throughout the investigation process that I feel that would drastically improve the not just the quality, but the efficiency of the investigations and how quickly we move forward. And then below that is our chart related to the days to close. So I am happy to see that majority of our complaints are closed within that 180-day mark that we try to shoot for when we are looking at our investigation times. Next slide, please. So this is a new slide that we did add that the advisory committee had asked for. Instead of looking at the top 5 closure reasons, which a lot of them were non-substantiated or insufficient evidence, we looked at the top 5 complaints that are being referred to discipline for some type of action, and what are those allegations or those violations rather. So we have the breakdown there for 8 for fraud, false, and misleading advertising, 6 for contractual, 5 for irregularities in admissions, 5 for unapproved institutions, and 5 failure to provide accurate, timely refund. So those are the numbers that we are referring to. The discipline unit is our anticipation, and just knowing some of the cases that we have that we are working on, that these numbers are going to continue to grow, and as we move forward to address issues in the industry. And so then to the right of that is the breakdown of the number of cases that are closed in intake versus those closed in investigations, and then the total closures. So far this year, we've completed 434 investigations. Next slide, please. And then this is just a trend line showing the pending cases that we have. And again, acknowledging that we are seeing a higher number, and then due to some staffing issues and some turnover, the production is slightly down, but we expect that we've had some new staff coming on, and I know that they're coming along really well. And the management team is starting to round out, and we currently just have the 1 vacancy. So we anticipate that we will get back to a higher baseline as far as our output to match the number of complaints that are coming in. And again, working on our efficiencies and things to improve that process, to make them more efficient and simplify that process for our team is something that we are currently working on and anticipate that will have an impact on our statistics as we move forward for the remainder of this year. And next slide, please. And this is a breakdown of the pending cases that we have and where the timeline as far as their aging for the cases. And again, a vast majority of our cases are in that 180 days. That is a goal, but it's not something that is a hard deadline for us, especially if an investigation requires more time to ensure that we have obtained the adequate information and evidence to prove any allegations and making sure that we're doing our due diligence. Next slide, please. And finally, we have our student impact so far this year, a total of over $33,000 refunded to students or their federal student aid accounts, having students receive their degree or diploma, proof of training. So these are some of the positive outcomes that we haven't been able to achieve. And again, this is something that I emphasize with our team is the why. And the who that we're looking for, that we're looking out for, and it's the students that drive us to do what we do, and keeping that in mind is something that's important for myself, and I know that's something that's important for my team as well. So I appreciate all of their hard work, and this is the fruit of their labor so far this year. I believe that concludes my report. I'll open it up for any questions.
Great, lots to dig into there. It's open for committee comments and questions for Daniel. I can jump in. I have two questions. The first, can you describe a circumstance that would result in a closed at intake? So a complaint is closed at intake. I want to make sure I understand what you mean by that.
I think generally for those, the most common one would be non-jurisdiction. So if we see that it's not within our jurisdiction, what we try to do is be as helpful as we can to the student instead of just saying it's not within our jurisdiction and we're closing it. We try to identify an agency that we can refer them to. And I know that we've built some relationships with a lot of different agencies, federal agencies, state agencies that we have been able to refer students to address their complaints or concerns.
As an ad hoc report, it'd be helpful to see, we haven't seen closed at intake in my recollection broken out as a category. And so I'd be curious to see that over time, even just by year, number of complaints closed at intake. That's a substantial, it's about half of your 0 to 90 day caseload that were closed at intake. And so be curious to see what that's looked like over time.
I will take note of that.
And then I appreciate the addition of the table for the top 5 allegations referred to discipline. That's helpful. I don't appreciate the substitution for the dispositions, the top 5 dispositions. I would encourage you to continue to include that in the report. And I'm curious what the rationale was for removing the top 5 dispositions.
I think the comments that were provided at the last advisory committee meeting were that the top 5 closures generally were the ones that were non-substantiated, that accounted for the majority of that top 5. And therefore, it wasn't really helpful to see what impact we were having with those numbers. So that's why we decided to remove them. But if it's something that you would like to continue to see, I can definitely add that back in there.
Yeah, I would actually. I think it's factual information. And so the fact that a complaint was made and it was found to be unsubstantiated, or that the Bureau was not able to substantiate it, I think is a material fact and might be uncomfortable for some stakeholders or something that they're not interested in seeing. But from my perspective, certainly it is valid and meaningful. And I have one other, which is the growth in pending caseload is obviously problematic, and you've alluded to some of the issues regarding staff turnover. Do you have, absent optimism, do you have any leading indicators that we're going to make progress on that pending caseload and be able to bend that curve down in the near term?
Yes. So just in monitoring the progress of the investigations from day to day, and looking at the improvements that we've already implemented and the improvements that we are continuing to implement, I see that there is progress as far as movement of cases being referred to management for closure and review. And I know that we've had a good amount of cases that we've been referring to the discipline unit that are not accounted for, because I believe the cutoff for this was at the end of June. So in July and early August, we've had a lot of progress with our investigation. So I think that's what's leading to my optimism, those leading indicators. Yeah.
Good, I appreciate that. Thank you.
This is Margaret. A couple of questions. On the chart about the ones closed at intake, do you just tell the complainant where they might file the complaint, or do you actually refer it to that other agency and send them the complaint? Or do you ask the complainant, is it all right if I send it to this other agency? How is that handled actually?
I think it's handled in various ways. So in some instances, we would refer it directly to the agency. We would send them a letter and CC the complainant the same copy letter informing them that we have forwarded this information over to this agency to address their concerns. If there's not an agency that's identified, then we would send a letter to the student informing them that it's not within our jurisdiction. And many times they would contact us, and I know that our intake staff try to be as helpful as they can, and even doing research and looking for other agencies that we may be able to partner with to be able to refer directly to. And I know that some agencies also prefer that we just refer the student to them and have the student file the complaint rather than us filing it on their behalf. So there is various ways that we do it, just depending on the relationship with the other agency, and then also sometimes just the preference with the student.
And the other question I had is on the top 5 allegations referred to discipline. Can you give me an idea of the kind of complaints that would be irregularities in the admission process, but that wouldn't be misleading?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'm still getting familiar with a lot of our laws. I don't know that particular one off the top of my head, but I can provide an answer in future meetings as we continue to report.
I'm just trying to figure out the difference between the fraud, false misleading advertising, as opposed to fraud in the admission process. And I assume that there's some overlap, but I was just curious as to why they might end up in the admissions category rather than just the straight misleading category. I appreciate you providing that new information. Thanks very much.
And also, just to address your question as I can, we are looking at our closure reasons and making sure that we are consistent with those. So I know that this is something I'm going to be diving deep into here pretty soon. And we've already started looking at those things. So I'll get a better understanding of why something is closed with a certain closure reason versus another. And I know that sometimes when there is overlap, there's kind of a decision that's made from one to the other. So I know that's something we're looking at and trying to clarify internally so that we have consistency with that. So I will have a better idea of that in the near future.
Great, thanks.
Follow up on that, do your staff have a rubric or a reference guide that you use in training that helps them describe which category, what goes in which bucket?
So with staff, yes, so we have a list of our closure reasons that they're provided, what's available. When they write the report, they'll make a recommendation of what they feel it should be closed under. But it's ultimately the manager that makes the decision because we're the ones that have to log it into the system. So that's where we are able to kind of ensure the consistency and that all managers have the same interpretation of what closure reasons should be appropriately used.
If I may jump in and offer a suggested thought, it could very well be that the link to fraud to advertising is more of a black and white print, but the admissions process could potentially be referencing a human element, something that was said to them, something along those lines with their admissions representative as a potential differentiator, as one is in print via a brochure or something along those lines versus something in their human interaction. So again, not certain, but just in knowing the process and also in reading these categories, that would be an assumption on my part.
Thank you, Tess. Any other committee questions or comments for Daniel? Very good. We will move on then and open to public comment. And this is on agenda item 8E, 8F, the complaint and investigation report.
We are now open for public comment on agenda item 8F. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Daniel, very much.
Okay, we are actually ready to go back to item 8B, which is our licensing report, and that will be presented by our licensing chief, Ebony Santee, who I just mentioned a few moments ago is also now playing double duty, also as our acting education administrator over the Quality of Education unit.
Thanks, Debbie. Good morning, everyone. So our licensing report as of July 1, I think next slide. We received a total of 870 applications, the bulk of those coming from full approval changes, changes for accredited institutions, and verification of exemptions. I would like to point out a positive. We're down 34 days for processing full renewal applications and 47 days for processing accredited renewal applications. Thank you, team, for that. To our oldest full applications in the queue, it's 6/22/2021. However, that application will be abandoned as of tomorrow. It's incomplete. There has been no response for a year to at least 3 letters and follow-up phone calls. The oldest full app under review was previously 1/30/2019. However, that application was approved as of the 12th of this month. The oldest renewal full app under review still has discipline issues, and I believe with other agencies as well as ours. And the median date of full applications in our queue is May of 2022. We currently have a total of 1842 locations. That includes mains, branches, and satellites. For accredited approvals or approved by means of accreditation, we have 414. We have 528 full approval institutions, 1 conditional, and 22 provisional approvals. And as of July 1st, we have 88 approved out-of-state registered institutions. And that's all. Are there any questions?
Committee, do you have any questions or comments for Ebony on the licensing report?
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's for you or this is something that Debbie would have, or maybe it's something that somebody would need to just look back at. But I'm kind of curious how the number of locations compares over time. I know sometimes there have been people complain that many schools are no longer in business because of the overregulation or things like that. And I'm just kind of curious if the number of school locations is actually dropping or rising or pretty much staying somewhere consistent. And I assume that's not necessarily something you'd have at hand, but at some point that might be an interesting piece of information for us to understand.
Okay, I'll make a note of that for next time. I will say we did see some change during the COVID period or a little bit after because smaller institutions are just viability for those locations. But I will try to get some more historical data for you for the next time.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comment from the committee? Very good. We'll move to public comment for agenda item 8B, the licensing report.
We are now open for public comment on 8B as in Bravo for the licensing report. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no requests for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ebony. And I think congratulations with the 2 hats. That's a positive thing. Moving into.
Thank you.
So it's a congratulations question mark. Thank you question.
Right. Thank you.
I could reflect. All right, Debbie, back to you.
Okay, great. So we've already covered C, but now we're ready to go into items 8D and E, which is our annual report, update, and compliance and discipline report. And I will start by just very happily introducing you all to our newest chief here over at BPPE. Elizabeth Elias is our new enforcement chief over compliance, discipline, and the annual reports unit. She has a long history with the Department of Consumer Affairs, but was most recently the Assistant Executive Officer over at the Dental Hygiene Board of California. So I'll let her say a little bit more to introduce herself before she dives into the programmatic updates.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's been a great decision to join the Bureau, and I want to also thank all Bureau staff for the warm welcome that I have received. As Debbie just stated, I have been with public service for the last 16 years, 13 of which have been with the Department of Consumer Affairs. Prior to my current appointment, I was the Assistant Executive Officer at the Dental Hygiene Board, where I oversaw all programmatic functions. Prior to that, I spent 10 years at the Board of Registered Nursing in an enforcement capacity, and most notably as their probation program manager. Prior to that, I've also held positions with the Department of Public Health, Emergency Medical Services Authority, and the Department of Community Services and Development. Moving on to the annual reports report. The annual reports unit currently has 2 vacancies, which include the annual reports supervisor and an analyst. Recruitment for both positions is in process, and the Bureau is working to fill both vacancies. Effective July 11th, 2022, Title V, California Code of Regulations, Section 74110, became effective. This requires specific graduate identification data to be reported to the Bureau as part of the annual report submission. Bureau staff have been determined to make implementation of this new regulation as clear and simple as possible. Notice was provided to institutions on July 13th, 2022, that the information would be required as part of the 2021 annual report submission, which is due December 1st, 2022. Further notification was sent on July 26, 2022. Bureau staff worked closely with DCA's Office of Information Services to develop an easy-to-navigate template. The template includes information on how to use the template, a dictionary with definitions, and a tab to enter the institution data. The template can be found on the Bureau's website by logging into the annual reports submission portal. The Bureau also worked closely with a few institutions when developing the template to ensure that the template was user-friendly. The July 26th notice also provided several responses to frequently asked questions regarding reporting requirements, such as an annual report does not need to be submitted during the 2021 reporting year if the institution was newly approved in 2021 or 2022. An annual report is only due for institutions approved to operate by the Bureau. Requirements do not apply if you are an out-of-state registrant or an exempt institution. In the 2021 annual report, institutions must report student-level information for each student who graduated in 2020 and 2021. In future years, institutions will only need to report student-level information for 1 year of graduates. The Bureau also understands that some institutions may not have a Social Security number or individual taxpayer identification number for each 2020 or 2021 graduate. After July 11th, 2022, institutions will be expected to collect and report this data for each graduate unless the graduate does not have an SSN or ITIN number, which shall then be reported as not available. And that concludes my annual reports report. If there are any questions.
In the past, the Bureau has done specific outreach workshops throughout the state. Specifically, I recall regarding the school performance fact sheet, like the completion of that. Are any such events or webinars, anything like that planned for this change in reporting as well?
At this time, we are monitoring institutions' needs as best as we can, and we are open to suggestions. Additionally, if the institutions do need assistance, they can currently reach out by email directly to bppb.annualreports@dca.ca.gov.
Got it. Thank you. Other questions or comments from the committee? Very good. Hearing none, we'll open to public comment on agenda item 8B, the annual report, 8D.
We are now open for public comment on 8D as in Delta. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, shall we return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. And thank you and welcome aboard, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Very good. Debbie?
So we are actually sticking with Elizabeth for the next update on compliance and discipline.
Thank you. I'm not sure of the next slide if there's the charts. If not, then I will just give my report. Okay, there is a chart. Thank you. So the compliance stats, these are as of June 30th, 2022. Compared to 2021 totals, we are at the halfway mark of this current calendar year 2022, but we are only 0.5% down from the totals of 2021. So we are on track at this point to complete more total inspections than have been completed in the last 5 calendar years. Of the total inspections from 2021, we are up 24% of the announced inspections. We're down 22% of unannounced inspections. And we are also up 105% of the notices to comply being issued compared to 2021. And we are also up 18% of the number of enforcement referrals. And again, this is a comparison from a full calendar year to stats for only half a calendar year. In the inspections canceled column, I do want to flag that at the last advisory committee meeting, it was reported that there were 15 inspections canceled. After further evaluation, those numbers were incorrect. To date, we've only had 11 that have been canceled. There was some misreporting as 4 of those cases were actually rescheduled and were not considered canceled inspections. And we can move on to the next slide. And this slide just shows a visual of the information that I just reported. And this is also a duplicative visual of the information I reported. We can move on. And this just went back to what I reported. We can move on again. Okay, moving on to discipline. The statement of issues, there have been no changes since the data that was reported at the last advisory committee meeting. Moving forward. For accusations, we have had 2 cases that have resulted in a default revocation since the last report, and we have had 1 additional automatic suspension. And, oh, I'm sorry, moving forward. Okay, we've had 1 additional automatic suspension in 2022, and we have issued 1 emergency decision, which was recently upheld, and we have a current case pending to file an accusation on the emergency decision. We additionally transmitted the 1 additional case to the Attorney General's office, and we have 3 cases that are still pending for us to file an accusation against the institutions. Next slide. This data represents the total of citations issued this year. We are down 85% of citations compared to 2021. However, as previously reported, there has also been an increase of the number of enforcement referrals since 2021. And due to staff turnover, it is my expectation that as we work through some of the backlog that has been created, that those numbers for the citations being issued will increase significantly as we onboard and train staff. And I believe that was the last slide. This is, again, duplicative info from the last slide. Are there any questions?
I do have a question, and congratulations again, Elizabeth. Your background is quite impressive. You've done quite a bit, so very pleased to hear about that. Suggestion, comment, maybe question, similar to how the top 5 complaints are categorized, any value in looking at enforcement and referrals and notice to comply in a similar format? Like, what were the top 5 most common reasons for the notice to comply or enforcement referral. Not sure if that's something that's too broad to capture in that format, but if it were to be something that was a trend or a data point, it would be interesting to see what that looked like.
Yes, I'm not 100% sure at this point in time if that data is currently being collected, but if not, I do agree that that would be a good trend to observe, and it's something that we can work on.
Right, as a backup, if that were to be the case, that could potentially be something in the workshops that gets accentuated to the attending schools so that they can be certain to place focus in those particular areas too. But thank you again, and great information.
Thank you.
This is Margaret. I had a question on the compliance stats showing the inspections. And I noticed that for 2022, the announced versus the unannounced inspections are sort of in the opposite percentage as they were in 2019 before the COVID. And I'm just wondering if there is some explanation as to why there's more announced inspections this year and fewer unannounced.
That is something that I can look into. Being so new to the position, this is also an area that I have observed, and I would like to also get an answer to. So I definitely can come back at the next meeting and provide some more context to those numbers. But from my understanding currently, I believe, the inspections are done kind of on a schedule, and it could just be how the schedule has fallen at this point in time, but I'm not certain of that, so I definitely can come back with some more concrete information for you.
Thank you, and I recognize you being new in the position. It will be for next meeting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, not hearing any other questions from the committee, we'll go ahead and open to public comment on the agenda item 8E, the compliance and discipline report.
We are now open for public comment on agenda item 8E. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, shall we return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. And I believe, Debbie, by my scorecard, we have A, G, and H still remaining.
Yes, exactly. And I'm so excited that we can now actually turn back to 8A, and then I think we're going to be back on track with the rest of our schedule. So for 8A, for our IT system project update, we once again have Sean O'Connor.
Hello, everyone. I want to do a quick check. Can everyone hear me?
Oh, you are very quiet, Sean.
That is odd. I will speak up. Can folks hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. I'll try to speak up. Not quite sure what's going on with my audio. But if at any point during this presentation you cease to be able to hear me, I will temporarily pause and connect via a different audio method.
You could send this ticket to IT. They might be able to help. I'm kidding.
I was going to say the same thing. Ironic that it happens to IT.
Well done. Well done. We're off to a roaring start. Thank you. First, I wanted to thank the staff and the leadership and the committee for flexibility in the spot of where this falls on the agenda. I had some other commitments this morning that I couldn't get out of, but I guess I could still say good morning, committee members, BPPE leadership, staff, and members of the public. As Debbie mentioned, my name is Sean O'Connor, and I was formerly the project director for your modernization project, but I've recently accepted a position outside of the department. But if you thought you were getting rid of me, think twice. I'm still assisting and guiding staff on this implementation just to ensure that there's a smooth transition and completion of several of the remaining key activities, particularly those key activities we have around the BPPE functional rollout, continued functional rollout that we have. So while I'm in a guiding role on this, the day-to-day operational assistance that the BPPE staff is receiving is coming from someone named Jeff Alameda, who is also on this call, who worked under me when I was serving on the project. So happy to still be playing a role in making sure that there's some continuity of planning and strategy around this whole effort. I'm going to briefly provide background because I don't want to take for granted that folks recall all the context around this effort. But beginning in January 10th, 2020, BPPE, along with 3 other programs, began a pursuit of modernizing their current functionality. The Bureau shares costs and resources in this effort with 3 other programs. And we utilize an incremental agile project management process, which is an industry wonky term. I think I mentioned it last time as well. That just means we're structuring the development of this project in a manner that allows us to kind of compartmentalize moving functionality and modules out to production, so we don't have to wait until all functionality is complete before we roll it out. So that's the strategy that we've been utilizing, and it's a common one that's used when on modern IT projects. I want to turn to accomplishments to date, then talk about current activities and project schedule, as well as an update on budget, and then we'll open it up for any questions. So accomplishments to date, we've had 3 major software releases, as well as a variety of different smaller targeted releases for BPPE functionality. And currently working out there in production is the non-accredited online initial application, as well as the back office workflow associated with processing that application by BPPE staff, an online consumer complaint form, back office consumer complaint processing, including the investigation and discipline processes, and then back office inspection processes. We've also done and completed data conversion of all the investigation, discipline, and inspection data, as well as a select amount of licensing data that is needed for reference purposes on those enforcement business processes. We've also, I mentioned some smaller releases, pushed some targeted enhancements in functionality that we already have out there in production that I just described, while we work on the rollout of larger functionality like the remaining BPPE application types that I'll talk about in a moment. These smaller targeted enhancements are usually business process efficiencies that are kind of quick win types of things that we try to roll out, as well as changes that might need to be made due to updates to the law or regulations. I'll transition now to current activities and project schedule. So since we last spoke, I wanted to highlight a couple of areas where we've seen a good amount of progress. The testing that goes along with converting the remaining data from the legacy system sale over into the new Connect system has progressed quite a bit since the last meeting. We're going to be commencing one of our last 2 major dry runs, or think of them as dress rehearsals, before the end of this month. We've also made a lot of progress in completing development and testing on several other functional areas, including STRIF claims. STRIF claims is going to be deployed when we deploy the remaining application types in our next major software release. So another update on what we've been working on. We have encountered more refinements needed to some of our application processes and workflows, those remaining application types, than we anticipated last time that we spoke. This has extended our original timeline of rolling those additional application types into the existing functionality we have in production. I'll just speak plainly, the business processes around these application types are complex, particularly when compared to license types implemented for other programs in the cohort. The complexities around kind of organization structure and some of the things that we can track in the newer system due to it being more modernized functionality as opposed to what we were limited to in the older system, is kind of we've come to realize how we can improve some things and feel like we want to make those improvements before we roll the system out entirely. So we are, working with your staff and the chief about status and timelines. I meet with Debbie weekly to provide her status updates. And right now we're working out the remaining application enhancements that we want to make for those remaining app types to get rolled out. Renewals, substantive change applications, verification of exempt applications, things of that nature. Working on prioritizing the enhancements around those and working with the vendor on identifying a feasible burn down rate to get us to a targeted release for those remaining application types so we can get those rolled out into production. I'm going to transition now over to project budget. From a budget perspective, the development resources that we've utilized to complete the scope of this effort have been within planned expenditures for year to year. We work with the vendor to manage the budget and ensure there are adequate funds to support the system moving forward. With that being said, I do want to connect the budget update to some of those comments that I made earlier about needing to spend a little bit more time refining applications than originally planned. While the project implementation expenditures have been under budget year to date, and we expect that trend to continue, we are in a position where we're expending more dollars this year towards that end of rounding out the applications than we had originally planned on. So while we're not going to exceed our budget from a perspective of overspending what we had planned to spend this fiscal year, even way back in 1920 when we planned this project out, it's kind of had the impact of pushing out other functionality that was identified as lower priority so that we can utilize the resources from this year to refine those applications and get those rolled out. So I just wanted to mention that that is the case for this particular fiscal year. Once we roll those applications out, we'll be able to utilize our planned dollars for this year to improve some other areas of the system and put some polish on things that we've already rolled out there into production. I just wanted to, before we get into questions, just thank the Bureau staff as I do at each meeting, but I think it's important, even for the sake of sounding redundant, the level of support that we've gotten and partnership from the leadership levels on down has been really commendable and has helped us to get through some challenges and also achieve some successes, as I mentioned earlier, with the functionality that has been rolled out there into production. So just as your partner on the IT side, thank you to the business side for their level of commitment. And it is refreshing to see that level of commitment from the business partner on an effort as large and as important as this one. I'll pause now and answer the questions of anyone from the group, should you guys have them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sean. And I'd like to commend you and Debbie and staff on looking strategically at a business process rather than codifying it in a technical term when the business process itself is problematic or inefficient. And so thank you for doing that good work.
Thank you.
This is Margaret. Can you give us some example of some of the things that you are working on now that are, as you said, are taking priority over some of the other things that needed more refinement that has caused it to, I think you said, stretch out the timeline a little bit?
Yeah, so the prioritization that we've had to do on some of the refinements, Margaret, some of the stuff we're prioritizing is looking at things like ownership structure and how we track ownership structure in the system and adding more sophistication to that than what was there in the previous, in the legacy system that they're utilizing right now. Also, building into the system, because this system is so, like many systems are, reliant on, as an opportunity, email communication for notifying folks of important things. Your annual invoice is due for payment. You have, something else that is coming up too, or your renewal window is open now for you to start your renewal application, as an example. Collection of email in the legacy system doesn't give us a super great baseline to start with. So we've been building out some functionality around figuring out a way for these schools and their institutional representatives to come in at the outset through the portal and identify the contact information for those individuals, specifically the email address component, because it will be utilized so critically for the communications that go out. Also, just a few other things, really making sure that the STRIF fee invoicing is dialed in and working correctly. There's a lot of different sorts of formulas that go into the STRIF invoicing depending upon the reporting quarter or reporting year. And then the last thing that I'll mention that just comes to mind is also sort of the adding more opportunity and tracking and logging around when requests for information go out to a particular person who's on a license. So at what point did that request for signature go out to that owner on the application, and building more transparency around that so that staff can work with that and can re-trigger things as they work with folks. So those are the key areas of functionality that we've really had to spend some time dialing in over these last few months. Those are the examples, Margaret. If I missed a component of your question, I apologize. Would be happy if you were to restate it and I can make sure I give you a full answer.
I think you got to it, and I'm very grateful that Debbie and her staff have, worked with you to get to some of these things that are obviously pretty critically important. I had a question last time, and I don't know if you're the person to answer or someone else is, but in talking about converting the sale information over, particularly on complaints, but also things like institutional ownership and institutional positions such as financial aid officer, managers, and so forth. As I understand, that's all been transferred over. And my question about sale was how far back does that information go that was transferred over?
Oh, I would have to defer to a colleague at the Bureau on that one, Margaret. I'm sorry. Someone may know, but I don't know the answer to that question as regards to the sale data.
Maybe somebody else can provide the answer a little bit later then. Thanks.
What I can confirm the component of it, and just you kind of implied this, Margaret, is just that we are converting over all that data from the sale side, including ownership, institutional representative, location of records. There's probably a few other things I'm forgetting, but all that sort of supporting data is getting converted over with the institutions into the new system.
This is Debbie. I will chime in very quickly to say that we have been working on trying to kind of parse out the different kinds of information that get converted in a way that it would more clearly show kind of what we are bringing in historically and for how long, and what we're, in some cases not able to bring in. I think, some of the examples you just raised, Margaret, are things that I don't think are in sale right now. So, financial aid officer might be a good example where that's not something that we would have. And even if we had it in, there's going to be some pieces of information, even if we had them in a licensing application, they weren't necessarily tracked in our data system. So we'll be able to track that going forward if it's on the application, but not really able to go back through all the paper records and add that back in. So I'm hoping we can we've been working towards creating some sort of easily understood way of displaying what kind of information will be brought into to connect in for how far back.
That's great. That would be very helpful because it's always been a little blurry to me as to when people talk about bringing over from sale, what exactly is being brought over and how detailed that is. So thank you.
Before I know there may be other comments, and we'll go to public comment. I also would want to just echo the thanks. I know Sean thanked the staff here who have been working on that. I would also like to thank the staff who have been really leading the efforts. But I also just don't want to gloss over what Sean mentioned at the start, which is that he actually has a new job. He is no longer officially full-time with the Department of Consumer Affairs, supporting us on this project, but he is actually staying on board part-time to help out with some very high priority projects, including this one. And I want to acknowledge that, to both congratulate him on his position and to say I think it says so much about both Sean and DCA that they are still committing resources to making sure that we get what we need out of this system. And I know we're going to continue to get what we need even after he fully transitions with Jeff, who we mentioned, and the rest of DCA and OIS over there. But I just want to give him a particular shout out for thanks for sticking with us.
It's a pleasure. You're an easy group to work with. Thank you, Debbie.
Any other committee questions or comments for Sean? Very good. Hearing none, we'll move to public comment on agenda item 8A, the IT system project.
We are now open for public comment on 8A. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment in the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. Our next agenda item is 8G, the Office of Student Assistance and Relief.
Perfect. And we've got Scott Valverde, our OSAR chief.
Hey everyone, this is Scott Valverde. Thank you, Debbie, and to the advisory committee for giving me the opportunity to provide a year-to-date update on OSAR's activities. So if you want to go to our first chart there, Richie. Again, we have aligned our data with all the other reports. So sorry, we're a little bit behind in the last meeting, but as everyone else has been reporting, we have data displayed from January through June 30th. So as of that time period, OSAR has conducted 18 informed choice events, workshops, trainings, presentations, with I believe 827 is the number of student attendees that we've had in those events. It's a quick math, about an average of 46 students per event, and we're on a pretty good pace with 18 events halfway through the year, getting back up towards our pre-COVID expectations as more events become back online and as we mine for new events that are out there as well. So still a high percentage of the workshops in this particular category are in a partnership with the CalVet, the California Department of Veteran Affairs, through their CalTAP program. I think it's 14 of the 18 events that we had completed as of June 30th were in partnership with CalTAP. But we've got several others as well that we're working on and other opportunities to sort of expand that scope a little bit more that are in the hopper. You'll hear more about moving forward. We did the Steps to College workshop. We have a very high attendance, as you can see at our initial presentation that we did in partnership with the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. We're really trying to work closely with them and align sort of our shared outreach messages. And that event, obviously we had a really high turnout for where we were able to engage with student borrowers about OSAR services. And then the other one I would highlight is the BeautyCast Network fair that we attended for the first time. They actually reached out and found us and invited us to come. I felt really good about that. Really opened our eyes and minds to sort of conducting sort of an outreach strategy thread, if you will, around industry-specific opportunities that are out there. A lot of our outreach to date has been either in partnership with a particular agency or entity that works with a certain population, perhaps a demographic component to that. But this idea of going to an event that is really, providing resources for students of one particular industry, where both schools and industry folks and us and others are in one place at one time, was very successful. We got a lot of positive feedback in particular from that event. And so I'm charging my staff with looking for other similar opportunities in other industries where we have a BPPV schools have a high presence. So next slide would be chart B, which is our outreach efforts targeting incidents of where students required outreach services, either a closure, a school closure, or a site closure, a program discontinuation, degree suspensions, things like that. So that whereby we conducted that outreach through email campaigns and then working with students individually, sort of post that connection via email. So traditionally, we do that reach out. We provide resources that are targeted to that specific, like I said, incident, closure, program discontinuation, whatever it may be, with our contact information and our resources and an offer to do a workshop if that's what makes the most sense, or to set up individual appointments if that makes the most sense. That's definitely been a COVID implication that we continue to implement. And so again, 26 such incidents year to date, with about 1,300 students that we've connected with in that way. The third chart C at the top, is our closure workshop. So again, through that outreach campaign via emails, getting student rosters, working with the school or enforcement to get students' contact information, and then reaching out when a school does close. We did one so far to year to date where we actually did an in-person workshop. Again, that's we're slowly getting back to that point, sort of in this status as we are with COVID. But this model, this multimodal model, if you will, of doing both an in-person for event for students who that makes the most sense, and for that is their preference, as well as virtual workshops through WebEx like this. That combination is kind of slowly becoming our standard model. I think I mentioned that at our last meeting. We've subsequently had another fairly large closure in July, so post the data that's in this report, at a school that had multi-campuses, multi-locations. And again, we have done both an in-person and virtual workshops and one-on-one appointments for that closure as well. The third, the next chart, which is also under C, which is our phone call log data, sort of aggregated and then categorized, is something that we talked a little bit about in the last meeting. This is the first time we're providing this for you all as an attempt, sort of a baby step towards a more total true accounting of the number of students that OSAR is engaging with. So a lot of these data elements are required in other reports that we have. And again, it's as we started dropping in student information, now it's been probably 4 or 5 meetings ago, it's been my goal to sort of work towards a more accurate accounting of the number of students that we're connecting with through all these various modes and efforts. We're still not there yet, but this is a big step towards that. All of the first 3 charts that I talked about, informed choice workshops, closure workshops, email campaigns, often result in students following through on the offer to connect with us in assistance in various different ways. And these calls sort of reflect that and kind of give you a story, kind of give some context to like where the rubber hits the road really with direct services that we're providing. So obviously, student tuition recovery fund application assistance is a big part of what we do. It's a big part of helping the Bureau meet its objective of getting those students restitution for whom are impacted by a closure. But we help students in a lot of other ways as well. As you can see, student loan relief assistance often is working with the U.S. Department of Education or private lenders on applications for loan relief, borrower's defense claims, et cetera. Obviously, a lot of closure information, a lot of follow-up calls and engagement around what's going on with this school, what are my options, I wasn't able to attend event, what did I miss, that kind of thing. Informed choice consultation, again, most of that happens in person, in real time, in those workshops, face-to-face, but we often do get students following up with us on that. A lot of calls about transcript assistance as well. Our log is a work in progress. And so these are the categories that we have to date. We're looking at the other category closely and hopefully can flesh that out a little bit more in the future. But to give you an example, one of the things that definitely constitutes a fairly high percentage of the other calls that we're getting are out-of-state students actually, asking us about STRIF and OSAR and whether there are similar entities or resources in other states. Constitutes more than half of those 113 calls we've gotten, and various other things as well. So again, about 1,300 such calls to date. So the missing pieces, as I mentioned, in terms of like getting a real true accounting of our connections are social media engagements. We're working a lot more closely with the department's Office of Public Affairs on a social media strategy and hopefully bumping up those numbers as well. It's a common student preferred choice of communication. Email correspondence as well through the OSAR email is something that we will work to sort of replicate in terms of this call log, but that's a big part of our engagement as well. And then one-on-one appointments as well that happen often post the other types of workshops I mentioned. Just in closing, some of the trends that we're seeing are a lot more engagement with our external partners as well, participating really much more actively and at a much higher rate than in the past as OSAR was first sort of establishing itself. I mean, just in the two more traditional types of workshops for closures that we've had this year, we've had participation from BVNPT, from the U.S. Department of Education, from CalTAP, from the California State Approving Authority component of CalVet as well, and community colleges. So those representatives have all been participatory in terms of coming to our workshops, delivering relevant information for students who are impacted by those closures sort of directly, which is particularly helpful with Title IV and financial aid questions for having DOE there with us. So they're really seeing the value of these efforts and are really sort of partnering with us more shoulder to shoulder than they have in the past, which is great. And then I think that's also reflected in the participation in our biannual OSAR outreach partners meetings as well, something I wanted to highlight. So we have those twice a year, and our agenda and participation and those represented around the table are all increasing. Our most recent meeting, I think we had a record attendance. Pretty much every agency that we invited attended and participated content in terms of how can we work together to provide the best outreach information for students. And so that includes the Department of Education, the California Student Aid Commission, both CalTAP and CSAVE, two distinct components of CalVet. Let's see, and also we've had community college representatives and K-12 representatives. We've recently added DFPI, the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, to those calls as well. And I'm efforting to get, that's my next goal, is to get the CFPB to participate on those calls as well. So we're also communicating on an ongoing basis with the legal aid community. We have routine calls with them as well. And we're really working closely with the U.S. Department of Education on the recent announcements over the summer, which have been since the last time this group has met, where they announced additional loan cancellation relief for former Corinthian students and some other efforts that we will be working closely with them on ensuring that we're well coordinated around those students' restitution as well. So I think things are going well, like I said, in particular with external partner communication and OSAR. And I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Thank you, Scott. Committee, any questions or discussion for Scott?
This is Margaret. You anticipated most of my questions, Scott, so thank you for that. One quick question is, two questions actually. I didn't hear when you said the industry that had invited you to participate. Which industry was that?
Oh, that was a cosmetology event.
Okay. And then could you tell us, I assume it's public information, what school was it that closed in July?
It's California Technical Academy, and they had 3 locations, one in San Diego, one in Temecula, and one in Riverside, I believe.
And I guess the final thing is you mentioned, which was going to be one of my questions, you have routine calls with legal aid. Are those sort of a standard thing like you have with the interagency meetings, or
Yes.
are they ad hoc, or how? Tell me a little bit more about those things.
Sure. Actually, we meet even more frequently with them. Debbie and I have really worked together to try to make that a meaningful engagement, and having it link kind of directly to these meetings, actually. So we meet quarterly between the 2 advisory committee meetings, and sort of relay sort of topics of interest that happen in these meetings that we think they would have an interest in. And then they also help us with their perspective on things that not only this group are looking at, but the Bureau are looking at as well, that from a policy perspective that may impact their clients also. So yeah, 4 times a year we've been meeting with them.
Excellent, thank you.
Committee, any other questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to public comment for agenda item 8G, Office of Student Assistance and Relief.
We are now open for public comment on item 8G. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you.
Joseph.
Which will take us to agenda item 8H, the STRIF report.
Wonderful. And normally this presentation is done by Yvette Johnson, our administration chief, who's also over the STRIF unit. She is unavailable today, so we have Lisa Raffretti, our deputy bureau chief, reporting on STRIF.
Good morning, committee members. As Debbie mentioned, I will be presenting for the Student Tuition Recovery Fund in Yvette's absence. As you can see on our statistical page, we have started to see a little decrease in the claims that we're receiving, which is great news. Help us catch up on some of the backlog. The number of claims pending, if you go down to the next slide, has decreased from 1275 at the end of the fiscal year 21-22 to 1213 at the end of July. So we're definitely seeing progress in that and not receiving as many claims as we had in the past within each month. We have so far in July paid out $150,000 in STRIF claims. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. We currently have 19 claims that are with the the State Controller's Office for payment in the amount of $199,000, almost $200,000. And the next slide, please. This is the current fund balance. 16.5 million is our current balance. And as you can see, historically, we had a really high amount. We had to stop the assessment, and then we dropped below the 20 million mark where we had to start collecting assessments again. And I know we previously were asked how we came up with the assessment for $2.50 per $1,000 of tuition. And I just kind of want to hit that a little bit, is that we estimated the number of claims that we were going to be completely monthly, which was, we set a goal of 50 claims per month. And at that rate, we estimated the fund to be exhausted in 2023. So increasing the fee to $2.50 per $1,000 of tuition would ensure that we have the funds available in order to continue to pay the claims without causing the students to wait for the funds to be available to help reimburse them. And I don't know, some of you may remember in the prior to 2010, the STRIF claims were definitely waiting to be paid as the STRIF assessments were coming in, and it was really a disservice to the students. So we really wanted to prevent that from happening. Additionally, working on our backlog, I just want to give us some staffing updates that we are currently prepping to complete some interviews for analytical positions. And we have 2 analytical staff that have been assigned from another unit into the STRIF unit for full-time temporarily to help us with processing the claims. And we recently filled our support staff, who is going through training and revising procedures on intake and processing of the STRIF claims. And with that, I will open up for questions on STRIF.
900 of the 1,200 outstanding claims or pending claims are for Silicon Valley. Can you, I think that I'm just trying to look back at our last number, but it doesn't look like there's been really any material progress made on those. Is there anything specific to those that are causing delays in processing, or does it relate back to staffing issues as you described?
Thanks, Joseph. I think it's a little bit of both. Staffing issues for sure, but also the claims from Silicon Valley are very complex and require a lot of evaluation and determination and documentation.
Got it.
I had some questions. This may not really be for you, Lisa, but I noticed that most of the reports now are done on a year annual basis, and this report is done apparently on a fiscal year. And I assume that that's necessary because of the way the money is handled and so forth. But I just was curious if that works to have some reports done for you guys, if it works to have it done, some done on a fiscal basis, some done on an annual basis, and why the decision is to do it that way. That's one question. I don't know if you want to answer that before I go to my next one.
Sure. I can look into it, and I agree we should be consistent across the board. So I'll look into it to see if it's done fiscally because of the fund, or if we can stay in line with the other units and report it annually. I'll look into that.
It really doesn't matter to me. I just thought for you folks, it might be simpler if everybody was on the same schedule, but just a question. The other question I have is, as I was going through these reports before the meeting, it occurs to me that in most of the other areas, we have an analysis of how long it takes to handle a complaint, or handle a license, handle a whatever it is. And here, and so sometimes it's reported as what's the median time to approve a license or that kind of thing. And here, I don't have any sense of that. And also of the breakdown of how many complaints are still pending because they're waiting for a loan discharge versus they're pending because there's still work to be done. And I don't know how much, I hate to overload people with, putting numbers together for us. But if there is some further analysis that could be done on that, it wouldn't take a lot of time. I think that might be very helpful to see, because I am concerned, as you mentioned, about students, have their lives on hold until they get these things resolved.
Yeah, definitely. That's a a great comment, and we will look into being able to spar that out for these statistics. I know that they are keeping those records on like how many borrowers of defense claims are pending and so forth. So I'm pretty sure that it'll be easy to incorporate those statistics into this.
That would be great. Thank you.
Any other questions on the strip report? Very good. We will move to public comment on agenda item 8H.
We are now open for public comment on 8H, as in hotel. If you have a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, shall we return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. All right, that moves us on. We're going to go ahead and power through. There's no need for a break. We have the finish line in sight. We'll move to agenda item 9, which is the Bureau response to institutional closures and associated costs.
Wonderful. And I will just cue this up very briefly. This is also going to, again, be Lisa, but I just wanted to flag that this is in response to some of the comments at prior meetings, really asking that we spend some time looking at institutional closures, specifically, as well as the cost associated with those closures. I know that has been the subject of much interest, as well as policy debate. So thank you to Lisa for hosting a discussion on it.
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, as you can see in the memo that was provided, we did a brief, it provided a brief overview of the types of closures typically encountered by the Bureau. We have sudden closures, we have some wind down, some are steady, some are unsteady. We have some that are heightened scrutiny, and we have some that just disappeared or they relocated across state lines mostly. And then the range of activities associated with all the different types of closures are very broad also. As you can see, the investigations, we have to investigate if the school is still open or if they're closed and what happened with them, working with the institutions on ensuring that they are going through a proper closure and that the students are receiving the proper information and transcripts and such. Coordinating with other approving agencies or oversight agencies, reporting, supporting students transferring or teaching, going to a teach-out institution, and then providing information about financial relief options, processing thrift claims, obtaining custodian of records, and providing transcripts, conducting outreach events, and then the possibility of taking some disciplinary actions as well. The scale of unexpected cost incurred in response to sudden closures is very broad as well. We can have a small closure where maybe there's one campus we can send 2 staff out to. When we look at that as an unexpected cost around $1,300. And then a medium closure with maybe 2 campuses, 2 to 4 staff going out, that we averaged that to be a little over $21,000. And then we've had very large closures where, we've had multiple locations, multiple staff dealing with even bringing temporary staff on to manage the storing and scanning of records and so forth. And that was estimated at $124,000 to $200,000 in unexpected cost to the Bureau for those types of closures. So as you can see in the memo, it's very broad. There's a lot of different types of closures and different things that happen with each of those closures. And I am working very closely with our closed school analyst in updating some procedures and policies and so forth. So with that, I will open up for any questions.
Thank you, Lisa. That is very helpful work, and Debbie, as you point out, kind of brings to conclusion, or at least advances conversations we've had in previous meetings about that, and I think will serve well to inform public policy discussions going forward on the topic. Any questions from the committee for Lisa on the memo?
I think it was a very helpful memo, and I really appreciate that. One thing that made me start thinking about is what tools the Bureau does have. And one thing I would think it might be worth doing some brainstorming maybe with the Attorney General's office is the Bureau has the power to get a receiver put in place. A receiver is often a problematic thing because it can be very costly and a lot of effort and so on. And the idea would be to put a receiver in place when you have money available to pay the receiver, as well as, you know, to try to handle that money so that it's available for restitution to students and so on. But I think since this is a recurring kind of thing, it might be worthwhile to talk with the folks at the AG's office about having, whether it be possible to put in place at the ready sort of papers to be able to file to seek a receiver when the first inklings come along that a school is in financial difficulties, or when inklings come along that the school might be closing, so that you could get a receiver put in and then presumably carry out some of those functions that the school itself won't carry out as it's fallen apart. And that would relieve some of the work of the Bureau too, because then this receiver acting as the school would be able to pull the records together, set up, you know, where they would be maintained and so forth. That this kind of thing would only work in certain instances, of course, because often by the time you find out about it, all the money is gone. But it's something that might be worth looking into. And the other thing that might be worth looking into is, as Joseph mentioned, for policy discussion, is whether the Bureau needs to have some additional powers that it could use quickly when there is about to be a school closure. I noticed that, you know, the power, the Bureau has power to get equitable relief, including restitution and injunction and receiver, in addition to any other remedies. But as Lisa points out in the memo, a school is not concerned about the hammer of losing their approval since they're closing anyway. But whether we need to look at the structure for fines or something so that there would be some sort of an economic bite. And again, you know, that's all very problematic when they're closing because there's usually not any money left. And so that sort of leads us into discussion of whether I generally don't favor bonds because they usually are legislated to be too small, or if they're big enough, they're too expensive for the business to afford. So they're not usually practical. But this discrete area might be an area where that could be something to consider in the future, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. We'll definitely look into all of that. I can say that we do also, if there's a bankruptcy and it's a large closure, we do also go through that route and working with the AG's office.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Very good. We'll move to public comment on agenda item 9, the memo regarding BPPE costs related to institutional closures.
We are now open for public comment on item 9. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, shall we return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. Which moves us to agenda item 10 and a discussion among the committee about future agenda items.
I think there's some that we've raised in the past that we haven't gotten to yet, so I would just say take another look at those. And I almost hesitate to bring this up, but since the Bureau has time on its hands, joke. One thing that needs to be done, and this is a multi-year project, I think, but maybe could be ready in time for the next sunset review, is a kind of a review of particularly the disclosures or the consumer protections in place. For example, in looking at the 32-hour thing and what the Bureau could do to try to make sure that people understood that this was a unique thing that they weren't going to be protected by the Bureau. It looked to me as if the Bureau's only option was to require some additional disclosure in the catalog. But in this day and age, I'm not sure how many people are looking at a catalog rather than looking at what they find online. And I'm thinking that it would be useful to do some analyses, studies, whatever, to figure out, talking to school owners, talking to students about how students find out about schools, how they find out about courses, and then try to target those areas with the idea being that there could be more useful and maybe less voluminous disclosures so that students would know what they're getting into. But as I say, I don't know that that's a topic for the next agenda, but looking down the road, maybe that's something that we could start thinking about talking, at least have it maybe as an item of discussion.
I would like to suggest a future agenda item to look at the licensing application timeline specifically relative to school location. As you would be familiar from a comment that was raised earlier, specifically the requirements in the application, the site location requirements in the application, and whether a school may have flexibility, for example, to enter multiple prospective sites in which during lease negotiations, for example. So I'd like to have a dig into that section of the application specifically. Again, looking at the tension and relationship between long time to approval, average being over a year, and the requirement for an identified site for a new school.
I agree with that. I think it is worth certainly trying to figure out how to deal with that. Because as you say, there is tension between wanting to make sure there's going to be an actual location and having to pay for rent for a year.
We've made note of both of those ideas. Thank you.
Committee members, any other suggestions for future agenda items? Very good. Hearing none, we'll open public comment for agenda item 10 regarding future agenda items.
We are now open on agenda item 10. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no requests, shall we move on?
Yes, thank you. Which brings our meeting today to its natural conclusion. Thank you all very much for participating, especially members of the public. Thank you for participating in the process. And thank you, committee members. Any closing thoughts or comments from you, Debbie?
No, just thank you. Thank you as well.
Very good. So the meeting is adjourned. We decided, I think last time, do we need a motion? We don't need a motion in a second to adjourn the meeting, right? Don't think so.
Don't believe so.
No. Okay. So we are adjourned. Everybody have a great afternoon.